Hello, my name is Klaus Abels. I'm a syntactician at UCL, and I'm the program director for the BA in Linguistics. In this short video, I'll talk a little bit about the kinds of puzzles and interesting little problems around language that students in our programs learn about in their syntax classes. To frame the discussion, just think for a moment about animals and humans. Humans have the ability to learn and speak and understand languages. Other animals don't. It should be quite clear that our ability to speak languages involves rules, because we can come up with and understand new sentences, and we wouldn't be able to do that without using rules. For example, English has a rule that says subjects come before verbs, and that rule allows you to realize that apples fall is a sentence of English, whereas fall apples is not. And you follow this rule whether you know it explicitly or not, whether you've been taught it, as you might be in your English classes, or if you just follow it intuitively because you're a native speaker. Likewise, there are rules of interpretation, rules that relate sentences to their interpretation. For example, in active sentences in English, the doer of an action is usually the subject. So we get Spider-Man tickled the boy, with Spider-Man being the doer, and the boy tickled Spider-Man, with the boy being the doer, and it's always the subject who's the doer. Now that was very simple, but things get a bit more complicated very quickly, of course. Here's a new sentence, which I've illustrated with a little comic. I know Spider-Man wants to tickle him. There's Spider-Man, there's a boy. Spider-Man is thinking, I'll tickle the boy. If I know this, I can say I know Spider-Man wants to tickle him. But I cannot say that sentence truthfully if Spider-Man is thinking the boy should tickle me. That's why I put a little red cross there to indicate that the sentence cannot describe that particular scene truthfully. Here's another example. I know who Spider-Man wants to tickle. Again, there's Spider-Man, a boy and a girl. Spider-Man is thinking, I'll tickle the boy. If I know this, I can say I know who Spider-Man wants to tickle. But in the same scene, if Spider-Man is thinking the boy should tickle me, and I know this, I cannot truthfully say I know who Spider-Man wants to tickle. So Spider-Man, in both of these sentences, was the doer of the action. And so we might wonder what the rules are of English that guarantee this. And we might come up with the following generalization. Both sentences had the words Spider-Man wants to tickle in them, in that order. And both of them had Spider-Man being the doer of the tickling action. So we might think that in all English sentences with the word Spider-Man wants to tickle in that order, Spider-Man is doing the tickling. And that would be a reasonable assumption because Spider-Man, after all, is the subject. Let's see. Now let's look at a third example. This example is essentially putting both of these sentences together. Again, it contains the word Spider-Man wants to tickle. And the example is, I know who Spider-Man wants to tickle him. I've made a comic to illustrate what it means. Here's Spider-Man and the boy and the girl. And if Spider-Man is thinking the boy should tickle me, then you can say, I know who Spider-Man wants to tickle him. But if Spider-Man is thinking, I'll tickle the boy, the sentence all of a sudden doesn't fit anymore. And that's indicated by the red cross. So although Spider-Man is still the subject here, and although the sentence still contains the word Spider-Man wants to tickle, Spider-Man is no longer the doer of the tickling action. And you computed this interpretation intuitively when you saw these sentences. So you clearly were not using the rule on the previous slide. What's going on instead? Well, the rules are much more abstract. The rules are not about particular words and their order. They're about relating various sentences to each other. the sentence, I know who Spider-Man wants to tickle, relates to another sentence, which you might say if you're very surprised, namely, Spider-Man wants to tickle who? And I know who Spider-Man wants to tickle him relates to the sentence, Spider-Man wants who to tickle him? And you computed that abstract relation between those sentences and their meanings just very quickly and very intuitively when you first encountered these sentences. Now this is very complex, and to articulate all the rules that are at play here is the kind of thing that we do when we study the syntax of a language, to figure out the relations between different sentences, how the words are put together to yield the meanings that they do, and these surprising little facts that show us that very superficial rules, like sentences that have the word Spider-Man wants to tickle in that order always have Spider-Man as the doer. Those wrong rules, we find ways of avoiding in our analysis. Linguistics students at UCL learn a lot about the rules that relate sentences and their interpretations to each other. They study how such rules differ from language to language, but also how they're fundamentally similar. Our students study how babies and toddlers learning their native language manage to pick up the correct rules and avoid traps, like the wrong rule that we landed on above when we compared just sentences 1 and 2. And it's the kind of problem that keeps syntacticians going, because it's very interesting how our brains manage to come up with the correct interpretations intuitively and quickly and avoid the wrong ones. Thanks for watching.